1:15, 1:19. And so we'll get started here in a bit. Like Abe did in the last session, this is meant to be an intimate fireside chat. So feel free to come on over, come to the front. There's spaces right next to Debbie, or like they've threatened too, they're going to move from the podium to the crowd. But I'm really excited about this session because oftentimes, right, folks are more adversarial than collaborative. And so as we thought about, having this talk, just put together an excellent group of people that I think are going to be able to get to the heart of it, have a really engaging conversation, and come up with some solutions that we can all work with. So the session title is Collaborative Approaches to Planning. And the motivating question is, how can we build more effective collaborative planning processes between system operators, regulators, and stakeholders? And Lisa Schwartz at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is our esteemed chair. And so I'll turn it over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thanks, James, and thanks for showing up here. It's fitting that we're in the city of brotherly love, the place of my birth, for this panel on collaborative approaches. Our website for Berkeley Lab provides a lot of resources on this topic, specifically stakeholder engagement, but also the technical topic of distribution system planning, transmission planning, integrated resource planning, planning for customer energy resources, and we collaborate with many of you in the room. We also provide technical assistance to states and system operators in these areas. Please reach out to me to learn more. But this afternoon, I'll be moderating a panel, what I hope is an inspirational session for you on ways to build effective collaborative planning processes between utilities, regional system operators, regulators, and stakeholders. And we really have a great panel with a lot of experience doing that. So from Minnesota, we have Mike Bull with the Public Utilities Commission and Jody Londo with Xcel Energy. From New York, we have Schuyler Matteson with the Department of Public Service and Jason Frasier with the New York ISO. And from Hawaii, we have Ken Aramaki with Hawaiian Electric Company. Unfortunately, Lavelle Freeman was unable to join us, so we'll miss him today, but we have so many great panelists. So we're going to start off with 5-minute spiels from each of the panelists, sort of an opening statement to position their experience and their current work in the area of collaborative planning. And then I'll facilitate a panel discussion, and I'll open it up to questions from the audience near the end. So let's start off with Jody.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. I'm Jody Londo. I'm the Director of Regulatory Policy and Strategic Analysis at Xcel Energy. We're an investor-owned utility with operations in 8 states. We have 3.8 million electric customers and 2.2 million natural gas customers. And we're a national leader in wind energy, energy efficiency, carbon emissions reductions, and storm restoration. I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I lead our system planning, resource acquisition, and transmission and distribution system regulatory efforts for the Upper Midwest. I'm excited to be here to talk about collaboration in planning and in the regulatory process. We in Minnesota have a robust stakeholder community and are fortunate to have a commission that embraces and encourages collaboration and settlement of issues. In fact, we believe the Minnesota Commission stands out nationally as a shining star for its tribal engagement, direct collaboration, and encouragement of stakeholder involvement. This year, we participated in Commission staff-led efforts to develop new frameworks for 2 types of utility distribution investments to facilitate increasing levels of distributed energy resources and electrification-related load growth. These were a model for effective collaboration, included 15 staff-led workshops with 30 organizations, 100 individuals, subgroups, and several rounds of written comments, all in lightning speed, led to a commission decision in about 9 months, which is record time. This was a model of regulatory efficiency and is allowing Xcel Energy to make a proposal for a proactive grid upgrade project in conjunction with our upcoming integrated distribution plan that we're going to file on Friday of this week. At Xcel Energy, we've leaned into the commission's guidance and incorporate stakeholder engagement in everything we do. We even have a full-time stakeholder engagement individual on our regulatory team. As an example of our efforts, in our most recent integrated resource plan, which is our plan to meet our customers' energy needs over the next 15 years, we received over 10,000 public comments and had about 50 parties intervene in the proceeding. We held about 15 hours of stakeholder workshops that over 250 individuals attended over about 12 months leading up to that resource plan. We also held 8 public meetings around our service area in conjunction with commission staff and with another one of our regulators, the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Stakeholder engagement requires significant effort to plan and execute. And for our IRP alone, we invested over 700 hours on the development and delivery of these workshops. And so while that level of collaboration requires significant planning and time, it really pays off in terms of a better result that reflects our communities and other perspectives, and it results in alignment, which improves regulatory efficiency and outcomes. In the case of our resource plan, for the first time ever, all of this led to a settlement agreement that also included agreement on a set of resource acquisitions in a proceeding that was running in parallel with the resource plan, and again, in record time. We filed our resource plan in February of 2024, and we reached that settlement in October of 2024. The commission heard it and made their decisions within 12 months of us filing our resource plan. It was really a model process. Another example of specific stakeholder engagement we do is tied to the work that we're doing with our host communities as part of our coal transition. We're in the process of retiring all of our coal plants called HECO and King. The first HECO unit retired at the end of 2023. The next one will be at the end of 26. Our King plant will retire in 2028 and the final HECO unit at the end of 2030. Since 2022, we've been conducting quarterly engagement with both of those communities that include local chamber representatives, local government officials, legislators, regulatory agencies, Department of Natural Resources, Environmental Quality Board, National Park Service, Department of Transportation, you name it. It's a lot. And we talk about all kinds of topics, including the workforce transition, land use planning, remediation plans. In the coming weeks, we're going to be holding sessions with each of these communities regarding the tax revenue implications they should expect as our facilities retire. We're getting a lot of RSVPs for those. And we developed these sessions in partnership with the Minnesota Department of Revenue, and they're going to provide very specific impacts to each of these communities of what to expect. And that'll take into account legislation that was passed in Minnesota recently that helps smooth those tax impacts over time, but really allows them to plan. So in summary, our commission and Xcel Energy embrace collaboration in the regulatory process. It's a significant investment, but one that pays off time after time in terms of alignment on important issues, better outcomes, and regulatory efficiency. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Ryan, were we going to have a clock here? He's on it. All right, next up is Mike Bull.
Hi, everybody. Good job, Jody. I'm Mike Bull. I'm the Deputy Executive Secretary at the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. I was really happy to be invited to this. This is my first ESIG event. I got to say, I was a religion major that went to law school, and I sort of white knuckled my way through many of the sessions and tried to stay connected with and I learned a lot. So this has been really great. So I appreciate the invitation. I'm also really happy to talk about this topic of stakeholder collaboration. In my 30-year career, I've become a sort of evangelist around stakeholder collaboration and how it can lead to better, more durable energy policy outcomes when it's derived through genuine good faith collaboration. And we'll get into, I think, a conversation about what that means. But you need to start with you need collaboration amongst a broad group of folks, so that you want the collaboration to be something that approximate the public interest. So you have, you're able to work through a number of interests and issues with a population that looks something similar to a public interest. So this has now been sort of over my 30-year career. It's now this stakeholder collaboration has become a deeply embedded in the DNA. It's reinforced by our legislature. It's reinforced by the Public Utilities Commission, that this is what our policymakers expect is the stakeholders to be working together to try to work through issues and before bringing them to the decision makers. We have several examples of where this kind of stakeholder collaboration has led to what I think are nation-leading policies. But I want to start with what I think is the most important of those is the Next Generation Energy Act way back in 2007. So come with me in the Wayback Machine. But that's where the Minnesota clean energy story really began to accelerate. That year, the Republican governor that I served, Tim Pawlenty, had us develop a very aggressive clean energy package that included an aggressive renewable energy standard, a statewide carbon emissions cap, steadily declining greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and a very aggressive energy efficiency standard. We did no stakeholder engagement in putting that package together. And I'll tell you that we were dead in the water. As soon as we made the announcement, the proposal was met with furious opposition from Minnesota utilities of all types, from the investor-owned utilities like Xcel, Minnesota Power, Otter Tail Power, but also the state's 200 municipal and cooperative utilities. You know, that's pretty much one utility for each legislator in the state legislature. So, and then you add to that the statewide chamber opposition from statewide chamber, from the state's large industrial customers, pretty much every member of the governor's own party in the state legislature, we were dead in the water. But then over the course of the next several months, we met every day throughout that legislative session, just before the session and coming up to the end, every day through committed stakeholder negotiations where we painstakingly work through everyone's concerns and everyone's gotta-haves to address every one of those issues in good faith. We ended up passing the entire package with fewer no votes that year than the legislation to create make the Honeycrisp apple the state apple that year, which it was sort of astounding. But more surprisingly than the fact that we actually passed this thing, those negotiations made the bill better, stronger, more implementable. And through that work, I realized that stakeholder collaboration can help achieve outcomes that can reflect the highest common denominator amongst interests as opposed to always being the lowest. And that's when I became an evangelist for stakeholder negotiations. So those negotiations in 2007 sort of set the template for stakeholder collaboration on energy issues in Minnesota. And as I mentioned, is now an expectation of policymakers that we always do all of this. It wears people out. But it's necessary, and everybody agrees to how necessary it is. I guess another instance of significant collaboration on energy policy is the work that the Center for Energy and Environment and the Great Plains Institute, together, two important clean energy NGOs in Minnesota, did to pull together a broad group of stakeholders to discuss and plan critical next steps in Minnesota's energy policy. We called that work the E21 initiative for an electricity system for the 21st century. This was Minnesota's response to the New York reforming the energy vision work that was going on about the same time. But ours was entirely stakeholder led. We brought folks together. We met every month for a day-long, sometimes 2-day-long sessions to just grind through the set of interests and do just what I said we did with the Next Generation Energy Act, everybody had to put their gotta haves on the table. Everybody had to work together in good faith to see where we could find alignment between if I could get what I need and you could get what you need, how would we put those things together? And then we came up with a set of recommendations over the course of 3 years. And our legislature or our Public Utilities Commission then picked up these stakeholder recommendations and implemented many of those things like multi-year rate plans, transportation electrification plans, performance-based rate making, integrated distribution planning that Jody just mentioned, where we recommended to pull the distribution planning out of the engineering units within the utilities and make that a more public and collaborative process. At the time, it was relatively innovative, but now everybody's doing it, which is kind of great. Lisa had a hand in helping us get our IDP process off the ground. Then that E21 work shifted over to the natural gas system, and that stakeholder collaboration is, you can probably all guess, is we call it the G21 a gas system for the 21st century. G21 has given rise to broadly supported and bipartisan legislation like what we call the Natural Gas Innovation Act, which supports innovative efforts and pilots by natural gas utilities to broaden out how they will meet the needs of their customers, and to the development of natural gas resource plans, a framework that the Commission has adopted, and we'll start to see plans filed next year. That comes out of directly out of stakeholder engagement, stakeholder collaboration, working through a number of issues. Jody mentioned the Xcel IRP settlement, which is a landmark, I think, for Minnesota, and it shows that the stakeholder collaboration commitment lives on. And again, it resulted in the highest denominator outcome rather than a lowest denominator outcome. And so I think, so I just wanted to give you a sense of how important stakeholder collaboration has been and continues to be in Minnesota for durable policy, broadly supported energy policy. And we have real tangible results of that kind of work. And I wanted to share that with you, and I look forward to the conversation with my panel mates.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. Mike took all my time, so I'll keep it short. No, Ken Aramaki, I'm the director of integrated grid planning at Hawaiian Electric. This is my third week on the job. Prior to that, I was director of T&D planning. So as T&D planning director, I was also side by side with my colleague that was the IGP director. At Hawaiian Electric, our integrated grid plan started in 2018, and in 2024 is when it was accepted. So it was a 6-year process for this first cycle. There was a lot of engagement with stakeholders, community, as well as technical. So for our approach to the integrated grid plan, we started off with like 7 working groups. We also had a technical advisory panel, which some folks here like helped and provide input, like Debbie. And then we also worked with the communities. In the end, what we did with we had these 7 working groups, and then consolidated into one. Stakeholders generally got there was like a lot of commonalities, and they were attending multiple meetings, and they're getting kind of it was too much. So in this next cycle, some of those lessons learned, we have like one technical working group. We still continue the technical advisory panel, and then we have a community working group. What else was I going to say? This second round, oh, sorry. Yeah. The second round, the first round, we focused on generating resources. Second round, our largest kind of barrier that we need to address is transmission with the generation. So because of that, we're going to be doing much more transmission work. And that's going to have us being more out into the community and working with them. In Hawaii, as you can imagine, we're much smaller. But within our islands, there's like kind of micro communities. So we have to figure out and work with specific individuals within those communities, as well as understanding what their needs are. That's it.
Hello, everyone. Schuyler Matteson. I'm the Clean Energy Planning Lead at the Department of Public Service in New York. I'm wearing my fitness tracker today to see how nervous you all are making me. So this will be good. Lots of data coming out of this one, so it's pretty good. And I think, Mike, you're putting your religion maybe to good use, evangelizing to us all about all this great stakeholder work. We've been trying to do a lot of that work as well in New York State. As Mike mentioned about the REV proceeding starting back in 2014, 2015 timeframe, where New York State tried to advance load flexibility and distributed energy resources through a more market-based model. That process was very successful, although I think I still have many bruises from that process. It was a kind of a stakeholder management experiment in New York State, and I think we've learned a lot from that. We ended up using a lot of time creating working groups. I think we ended up with 7 or 8 of those. They were meeting almost weekly, which was way too much. Everyone got very sick of each other, ended up being a little bit combative sometimes. But once we all took a step back and realized what we were all trying to do together, it started to be very, very collaborative. And I think the results kind of speak for themselves. The value of DER tariff has been incredibly successful since it was launched. We have over 6,000 megawatts of distributed PV in New York State, which is an extremely exciting goal that we've reached about a year early. We have 300 or 400 megawatts of distributed energy storage in the state using the value of DER tariff. And that's kind of going to serve as a model moving forward for how we want to advance distributed energy resources and load flexibility. My current role is serving as the Clean Energy Planning Lead at DPS, leading the coordinated grid planning process, which is the process the state set up a couple years ago to try to model all of the transmission and distribution and generation needs that the state's going to need to invest in to hit our clean energy targets, which are pretty aggressive. You may have heard on some of our other panels this week, New York State has some of the most aggressive clean energy targets in the nation. 0 emissions by 2040 in the electricity sector. And that's not just any zero. It's not net zero, it's real zero. And that real zero actually even calls out carbon capture and renewable natural gas as ineligible technologies. So we mean it. We mean 0. That ends up landing on me. It's my job to try to figure out how to make that work. And so we've landed on this very collaborative planning process, working with the New York ISO, the joint utilities, NYSERDA staff, and the Department of Public Service staff to design these studies that end up giving us a collaborative and innovative result on how to actually make these investments to get us to that 0 by 40 future. That process has built-in stakeholder engagement throughout the entire process. We have regular technical conferences every few months for the broader stakeholder community. We also have ongoing meetings with the Energy Policy Planning Advisory Council. It's about every couple weeks. If you subscribe to our Matter Master in DPS, you can actually get these updates. Just search in Google because it's way better than going to the New York State website. If you just search 20-E-0197, you can get to the link and just hit subscribe, and you'll be able to get these updates. And anybody here can even attend these calls. You can listen to me talk for a couple hours about how we do planning. Listen to all the complaints and successes and all this type of stuff from all of our stakeholders on how we're actually carrying out this process. We're actually advancing, and I think Jason will probably touch on this later, we're actually advancing even more stakeholder engagement and even more collaborative processes moving forward with the advent of FERC 1920. The DPS and NYSO will be working together even more closely. But I just wanted to say that, we take stakeholder management and stakeholder engagement very seriously. I think there's a lot we can learn, especially in a very, very high renewable deployment future. When we have such aggressive targets and we have such a high load, and you need to end up using so much land, and you need to end up changing so many appliances out, you're going to have to rely on the individuals that are living within that state to a significant extent. And it will go a lot better if they are involved at the very, very beginning in designing those programs, designing those targets, and figuring out how you're actually going to meet those targets to begin with. So I think this whole trust building exercise is extremely important, and we take it very seriously. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about the specifics moving forward.
Thanks, Schuyler. Nice job. Jason Frasier, Senior Manager of Transmission Planning at the New York ISO. Out of curiosity, in this room, can you raise your hand if you ever attended any ISO or RTO stakeholder meeting virtually? Excellent. In person. Okay, very good. So to me, many of you know that ISOs and RTOs have very open, transparent stakeholder processes that are intended to draw as many stakeholders as possible to kind of keep track of what we're up to, what we're doing, what we're proposing, and how we're changing. So I'm very glad to see that. If you have not, I recommend at least finding one working group or one committee that aligns with your interest in attending, just to get a feel. You know, what do we talk about? What do we do at these stakeholder meetings? So built into ISO RTO processes are that open, transparent stakeholder engagement process. So that's kind of open, you know, stakeholders. I would also say there's an added stakeholder collaboration that does happen between the ISOs, RTOs, and their PSC, PUCs. So the relationship between ISOs, RTOs, PSC, PUCs is very different from state to state, from ISO to ISO. The nature of ISOs is to be independent, is to operate the grid, right? To plan the grid and administer the markets. The PSC and PUCs are looking at ensuring safe, reliable resources, rate setting, consumer protection policies. Most of the time those things align. They don't always align though, right? So there's friction that is naturally inherent in that relationship. I think New York has been very, very successful for a few reasons in our collaboration with our PSC and our DPS. First is we're a single state ISO. So we only have one PSC to talk to and one DPS that we have to work with. Automatically, there's just a lower number of people to work with each other. It helps that I really like the people at the DPS that I work with, including Schuyler. So that's a big benefit. But just the lower number, and we can kind of get deeper into issues and work through things together just because there's a lot less PSCs and ISOs to deal with. So just the sheer number. One area that I would like to point to, a particular area of success has been our public policy transmission planning process. I think the reason that has been successful is right from the get-go when we were writing our tariff and our straw proposals to meet Order 1000, we baked PSC into the process inherently. So right in the tariff, you'll see stages where information passes back and forth between the ISO to the DPS PSC, decisions get made or not made, feeds back. Everyone knows what the process is, so there's not really a lot of friction that needs to happen because it's already baked in and everyone knows. So that honestly has resulted in 3 very large bulk projects, over $1 billion of projects in service today, and over $3 billion currently in development for bulk transmission projects. So in my mind, that's been very successful. And those projects in service today were heavily relied upon this summer to help us move power through the system to meet load during stressful times. So very successful there. Some, I guess, advice or things I've noticed and how you actually do this. First is significant amount of communication. We talk all the time. Schuyler hears from me more than he wishes he did. We have meetings every week that we're really working through things. So that's number one. Another thing is actually working through roadblocks. There's a lot of times that when you get engineers and policymakers on two sides come from different backgrounds, a lot of times you can see engineers just throw their hands up and be like, they don't understand, I'm done. And when they hit the roadblock, and then policymakers are like, engineers are just trying to be perfect with everything, like stop it. You really have to work through that. Like you're going to hit that. There's a lot of common friction that you do see, and learn from other people with that. So that's another one. Another one is understanding each other's objectives right up front. Like if Schuyler just tells me, hey, here's what I'm looking to do with this, and I'm like, here's what I'm looking to do with this, then we probably got a day or two worth of, friction out of the way right there. So I will, Schuyler mentioned this one example where we're practicing this now on, is Order 1920. Just like our Order 1000 process for public policy, we're embedding, I think even more so, the state parallel processes with our Order 1920 process. So we're going to bake handshakes in between what we do to comply with Order 1920 and how we go through each of those objectives. and we're going to pass data information back and forth and have to the PSC sufficient information and collaboration to give the ability to make good decisions. So I'm very excited about it. I get to work with Schuyler a lot. It's great. But yeah, it's really embedding in the process, understanding things. Yeah, so the handshakes for that for CGPP that Schuyler was talking about in 1920 are getting worked on right now. And I think it makes both of our processes better.
Great, thanks everyone. So I really like Mike's stories about collaboration. I think that made it really very real. So I'm going to give a couple quotes with respect to my first question to the panelists, which is, how do you know that your stakeholder engagement has been effective? And then it's really a two-part question. How broad do you go? Because when in my day, I've been around for a while, the PUC, we did not have as many interveners. You know, we had the industrial customers, occasionally you get the cities, you'd have the residential ratepayer advocate. That might be it. And today it's just like so many stakeholders. So I wanted to quote Mike here. I loved a couple of your answers about what does it look like. So the highest common denominator, not the lowest, and genuine good faith effort to collaborate. So I wanted to get kind of some hot takes in that ilk on what does effective collaboration look like, and also your takes on how broad do you go and how do you manage that? How do you even prioritize? Do you prioritize certain interveners' comments or parties' comments over others? No. I want to start with someone other than.
Oh. Well, I can start. I can tell you how I know things are going well. So, you know, we've, since the VEDR days in 2017, stakeholders, the stakeholder groups have expanded. There's more industry groups. We have one for storage, one for solar, one for wind, one for offshore wind. We have an industrial group. We have a small users group. We have a DER group in general. Then we have some very active individual generation owners and developers, and we have the New York High. So we work with everybody has the perspectives that they're ready to bring. They're very engaged in our processes, and so we hear from them even when there isn't a stakeholder process going on. So we've set up this precedent. So we kind of have these regular touch points. I know when things in an actual stakeholder process are not going well, when the feedback is pleasant but kind of aggressive, and like I can tell in the way they're writing the emails and their voices on the phone that they don't feel like they're getting the information they need, that they don't feel like their questions are being answered. And if you get that kind of repetitive questioning, those you know, honing in on the individual quote unquote advocacy points, which some folks, you know, roll their eyes and like, oh, you're just bringing your, you know, your one point of view. You just you're going to keep saying your point of view. That's usually a sign that they don't think you're addressing their need. And so that usually calls for, you know, one-on-one meetings with them. It calls for a second meeting, or you know, addressing it in public so that everybody knows that they were addressed. That's usually how things are not going well. Things just keep coming up, and you kind of hear that more aggressive tone. When things are going well, I get a lot of thank yous. And, you know, and there's a lot of just emails that say, thanks for answering this question. And, you know, most of the stakeholder meetings end with a lot of silence because no one else is coming up with questions, and we're able to go over everything we need to go over. So it's kind of the feel, you know, and it's basically like managing any personal relationships. And I think if you can manage it in that way, treat it less of a regulator and, you know, formal stakeholder engagement and more of a relationship with people with different ideas, because you really need to rely on that diversity of perspectives. That's the whole purpose, right? You know, we're trying to bring more people in here to build that trust so the process goes smoother, and also to learn from them about, you know, their perspectives and what we might be missing, so we can make our processes and our actions much stronger. So as long as you can manage those relationships and make sure you're getting the most out of it, you're giving them what they need, and they're being able to participate and support your process, I think you can keep that fairly smooth. And hopefully nothing ever rises to that level where you get a note from the governor's office that a stakeholder wrote them a letter about your stakeholder proceeding, which has definitely never happened in New York, but yeah, or anywhere else.
Can you?
Yeah. So a note when you're talking about stakeholders, what I forgot to mention is like the purpose of our stakeholder engagement is to also allow for the plan to move forward with you know, less kind of paperwork. When we know when stakeholder engagement is not going well, when the stakeholders, you know, send in, you know, like hundreds of IRs that we now have to go and answer all these little things. And they're basically, when they don't like something, when somebody doesn't like something, they're going to just poke holes in it. Right? So that's all you're dealing with. On the community side, what's interesting and what's good about going to the community a lot is it helps to ground you in what is actually going on. Because the folks in the community that we meet with, and it could be like an actual event, it could be something else like another like resilience fair or something, like something that when most people think about electricity, they're out in the community, they're not going to come to an event just to talk about electricity. But when we go out there and we get to talk to them, we get to do we try to put in like little activities that they can help to inform our planning. We often find that maybe the community's priorities are actually not aligned with like policy priorities, which is also interesting, right? So there's this kind of conflict that we have to manage through the process.
I'll add a very quick one. On the ISO side, I typically know when things are not going well when we get no questions and everyone's just quiet. In the tactic, and I'm on to this, the tactic is don't ask questions until the last minute when there's a vote. And it works. It shouldn't work, but it works, right? Because then we end up having to go back and figure things out. So just a plug for please do ask questions and ask them early. From our side, the feedback I've gotten about when things are going well is when we get feedback at stakeholder meetings, outside of stakeholder meetings, and we actually do something about it. Meaning either A, we change something like, hey, that assumption is not accurate. We need you to go back and change it, please, because we XYZ showed you why. So then we change it, then people are happy, like we're responsive. The other is if we don't change anything, we still come back, recognize that the feedback was received. We didn't change it and give an explanation. I don't think people like to give feedback if it falls on deaf ears, and they're going to stop doing it if that's how the response is. So that's what I've seen from, silence is actually really bad.
So on the question of how broad you go, it's so today there are numerous interests involved in pretty much any important commission docket or legislative initiative. I think what we see, and I think Xcel does an amazing job at this. There's a outreach to the broadest set and try to bring an understanding, education up so everybody has a shared understanding of what's being discussed and what's being asked of them. But at some point, you do have to sort of dive in with a smaller group of folks in order to try to find common ground and move a proposal forward. And I think that's what you did with your Xcel IRP in 2024. So maybe you want to comment on
Thank you for the setup, Mike. We do start very broad. We maintain what we call interested parties lists for different topics. So for IRP, I think our list is maybe around 300 individuals. For IDP, it's closer to 500. And we held some DERMS sessions this year to talk about to get feedback on what people want us to do and to share our plans for what we're thinking about doing, in the near and the long term. We invited 2,700 people that we thought would be interested. We have a very robust DER community in Minnesota, and we had a turnout of over 200 people to talk about a DERMS. I mean, that's staggering. But thinking about the IRP, that's absolutely what we did. We held all of those stakeholder meetings, probably 10 of them over the course of, I don't know, maybe 9 months, very well attended, over 50 people at each one, combination of education and more of like facilitated discussion to get feedback. And then when it came time for settlement, we already knew we had some alignment. And so we worked with individual parties to come up with what we actually ended up settling on. And I mean, some of the terms of the settlement included agreement on Xcel Energy building a natural gas plant. And one of the parties that signed on to the settlement was the Sierra Club and Fresh Energy. and there were other environmental groups involved as well. So it was really quite a feat to have reached a settlement and to have such broad agreement from such broad perspectives on resource planning.
I assume everybody knows all these acronyms: IDP, Integrated Distribution Planning; IRP, Integrated Resource Planning; DERMS, Distributed Energy Resource Management Systems. You probably all know these. That's all right. We're going to be continuing our acronym journey. So I'm pretty enamored with informal processes to try to get to effective collaboration and really good decision making. And, you know, I'm a former regulator, so that says something. And, you know, so there have been different decisions around the country about what processes are formal. Like in today, most integrated distribution planning processes, or any kind of distribution planning processes where they exist, 22 states, Puerto Rico, those, you know, tend to be informal. IRP depends, right? And so I really want your takes on where you think informal processes really make a difference, where regulatory processes in and of themselves might fail otherwise.
I'm a huge fan of the informal part. You know, the DPS, you know, hat that I wear kind of puts a little bit of formality in everything we have to do. Just look at the paperwork I had to file to get here today. But you know, that formality has limits, and it kind of puts the stakeholders that come in front of you into a certain mode, right? They're coming as like stakeholders with, you know, with an agenda, and you're the regulator with the gavel, and you know, everybody's trying to engage that way. And I really try not to lead any of the stakeholder processes I manage in that way. I try to make it very much more engaging and much more personable, and everybody's just bringing their opinions, and we can talk through them. But even there's still limitations because of that formal process. And so I try to encourage folks to come to like one-on-ones or coffee chats or something like that, because there's a lot of education that could happen between the regulator and the stakeholders that could really get over a lot of the barriers that we see. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what the processes are. There's a ton of complexity. I mean, you just listed the acronyms, but there's like 40 or 50 more, and there's so much complexity in these integrated resource plans. All the modeling work that Jason's team does, it's unbelievably difficult and complex, and there's so many pieces of this process. It's really easy to forget which step is happening. And I can't tell you how much time we spend in our process, and I'm sure Jason and his team spends in their modeling process, just answering questions about what the model did. We're not even talking about, you know, preferences or assumptions or like decision making or construction or authorizations. It's just, wait, what was the assumption? What did it do? What did you mean? How does the model work? What's the optimization? And there's so much of that can be done in informal processes. And so we've been trying to have kind of stakeholder one-on-ones. We've been having learning sessions with different groups, just hosting webinars to say, you know, what is a capacity expansion model? What's a production cost model? What does it mean to, you know, match load with generation? How does this actually work? And how does it play into the formal proceedings? And that's really hard to do in a very formal setting. It takes a lot of effort and work and a lot of people signing a lot of papers to get a full stakeholder technical conference out and online. But if somebody can just have a call with me, shoot a couple emails, that informal process actually builds a lot of trust. It helps form those relationships and brings everybody kind of up to a better level to improve that stakeholder engagement overall.
Yeah, that's a great response, Schuyler. What I find, I mean, part of the ISOs, RTOs is built into what we need to do is to be open and transparent. So there's times that I do struggle with, scheduling one-on-ones with a certain, one specific sector without necessarily inviting the others. But what you run into is, during certain meetings, you may have just one sector, one individual that just does not understand what you're trying to do. And I know Schuyler knows this one, where, listen, if I can just pull you aside and have like an education session and sit you through what we're talking about, you probably can divert a lot of wasted time on that broad kind of meeting, get everyone to a common place of understanding and the impact on the sector they represent or company they represent. And I think that really, that targeted approach can help move the broad group forward. I don't think I've had a study or a major decision at the ISO where I haven't had to do that. Just because, You can't always get consensus either, but hopefully you get understanding because people represent different sides of the coin. So yeah, I think it's essential to have targeted, but as an ISO, my goal is open and transparent. So if you have that targeted one, like bring the same information back, make sure everyone's seeing the same stuff.
And just chime in and pile on. I agree with everything that these guys just said, but also that formal processes, at least in a regulatory environment, they're tended to build a record for decision by our commission. And so folks come to those kinds of efforts. They tend to set their feet in concrete. They're looking for an outcome rather than a shared solution. And so you find a lot of times that you get more progress by taking those questions offline with a smaller group, like you were just saying, maybe just even one. Those kinds of offline conversations can allow for creative discussions, brainstorming solutions, and that's what's often necessary in order to find those higher common ground outcomes than just continuing to fight about things in a formal setting and then leave it up to the decision maker to choose side.
Just one little quick thing to add. I think that informal process humanizes it. It just brings that sense of, and I think Mike used this word, genuineness to the process. Like we're all trying to do the right thing, and we can write the most perfect words in a regulatory filing that goes into the formal record, but there's just so much more to be said and to help people understand. And no matter how good of a writer you are, that just can't always come through in the written word. So that informal engagement is just so important to really help everybody get onto the same page, and oftentimes find that you actually have agreement when you maybe thought you didn't.
I agree that I'll explain how we use our informal process, but I think there's something different with maybe people in Hawaii. We're conflict averse. So at these meetings, like it's not like like people are not in your face or not really questioning. The ones that are actually have a hidden agenda or are there to block something are actually not going to say anything until it's time for the actual like documentation part. So that's where we get concerned is if, we, put up something that may be controversial and we know specific people might have an issue with it, but are not asking questions or saying anything. Then we go through the informal one-on-one process, call them up, and, just making sure you understand this. Yeah.
That's really interesting. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about brass tacks. What are some tactics that have really worked in your jurisdiction to improve collaboration, particularly with electricity planning? Any particular strategies? I mean, we've talked about some of them.
I think the process in New York improved dramatically after our first modeling learning session. We were bogged down for months with people trying to understand in the process, like how this was even working. Like why, we have targets in New York State. Why are you doing all this modeling? Why do we keep pressing buttons and asking for assumptions? Why don't you just go build 100% renewables or something? Like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And like trying to bring them into the process about, this modeling is happening anyway. Like this has to happen. It's good engineering. We need to know when and where we have to build things, how the load's developing. We're trying to bring you all in because the outcomes of this are going to directly impact where things need to go in your communities, in your territories. And you're going to be, asked to potentially even support this financially as a ratepayer. And so these are really important things for them to understand. And so bringing them kind of behind the curtain and showing them how the models work, I think was a huge step up. I think they kind of felt like they had privileged information at that point. They're inside what the utilities do, what the NISO does. And it's just like raised the level of discourse in our meetings a lot because it's a lot harder to, try to ignore the complexity and stand, on one, advocacy piece if you actually do know how hard it is and you do know, how complex it is. So that I think that was one of the biggest things in New York.
I'll add that I think technology has been a good enabler of helping us expand our collaboration with stakeholders, and we really embraced that, I guess, probably during and coming out of COVID. A lot of people obviously weren't going to in-person things, and when you make them available virtually, you can get broader engagement. That said, it also depersonalizes it, and we found ourselves slipping into talking at people kind of mode, and that just isn't effective. And so we've really looked at ourselves and what we're doing and started to make changes. And I'll say leading into our integrated distribution plan here this year, we invited guest speakers quite a bit to come and share their perspectives with all of our stakeholders. And then we shared ours, and we all kind of responded to all of that, and then shared as well as you were talking about for New York, how we were responding to all of the feedback and incorporating that into the plan that we're going to put forward to our commission.
Yeah, I strongly echo the in-person part. I can't tell you the number of meetings in the last year I've gone to present to a room full of just NISO staff. And everyone else is on the phone who's not from the NISO that actually is questioning. So that's tough. So great one. I would add, this one's interesting because, you know, we're doing a lot of technical work and transmission planning behind the scenes. We're running complex models, you know, making complex decisions. But one of the most impactful things that I've found is making really quality materials to present, to provide, whether it be reports, presentations, because that's your medium for providing information. What's conflicting with that is the fact that you need to get the models done and make decisions. So it actually takes a long time to produce materials, go through legal review, go through corporate communications review, and then do this on a routine basis. So that's one. The other one is a tactic that I like to use is just, if you know you're going to have to collaborate, just schedule meetings way ahead of time so everyone knows the forum exists. Like, hey, I know I have some questions, but in 2 weeks, this one's going to come up, so I'll wait till then. Then you can, you know, it's on the calendar, everyone knows, and you can save questions for them instead of having last minute ones. So that's worked for me.
I just add that I think it's for me, you have to know that this takes time and it takes commitment, and consistency has been mentioned, clear communication. What you need to take time for is to understand what those other interests, or what all the interests, maybe even one at a time, as people say, what do they need out of this conversation? And what do they, you know, and are there ways to separate the things they need from the things they want, and have it, then you can start everyone to focus on their needs. You know, what are their gotta haves? I say that a lot in my stakeholder call. What are your gotta haves? And if I can align my gotta have with your gotta have, then we're starting to build a foundation that we can build on, and then we can add other people to that, you know, that structure of gotta haves, and all of a sudden you have a coalition, and then you can do something.
All right, some of our panelists said we don't want to just talk about the good stuff. We want to talk about where we get stuck. So what are some of the barriers that you've experienced, and how have you gotten over them?
I have a big one related to timing. You know, timing has been a huge issue for us. I think we prioritized a lot of engagement and a lot of education work during this phase of our coordinated grid planning process. So during the actual planning process. And that made the first half of the process really kind of drag out as we brought everybody up to speed and made sure we could address everybody's concerns with how this process was even working, since it was the first time we're doing it. Now here, as we're closing in on the end of the process, we're bumping up against regulatory deadlines. We're bumping up against a lot of changes in the marketplace, in the country, and we really need to get action started like now. And so now we're at the end of the process. We're like, okay, folks, I know we set this up with like lots of stakeholder engagement where we really have to start getting to conclusions. And this is where people are starting to get a little bit more frustrated again at the end here, where they think we're trying to, you know, we're rushing, we're trying to skip over things. We're going to ignore their concerns now because we have like deadlines. And so I think that speaks to the need, like Jason said, like, let's have a long runway ahead of time so everybody knows what this is like. I mean, we had that in the order, but we hadn't been really prioritizing deadlines because we were trying to make this a very flexible process. Now that we're bumping up against these timelines, we're starting to have to lean back on that, folks, we're not actually going for unanimous outcomes here. And they're like, wait, what? One of us doesn't agree. We're like, I'm really sorry. We're going to have to skip this one. So we're really going for like Jason was saying, we're going for like full understanding, full explanation, addressing concerns, and then also saying, I understand. And we're also not doing what you're asking because we have to move on next week, and just really starting to push the process forward. And we're starting to have that tension and having to manage that and spending a lot more time in those, like, after meeting calls, responding to those emails. The other complexity with that timing challenge is that we're not just trying to figure out a plan in general. We're not just, asking everybody their opinions and then putting together and see what comes out. We have laws in New York State. We already have a law that tells us where we need to go. And that's been a big challenge. Everybody has a slightly different interpretation about what that law actually means, about who's supposed to do what in the law. And they're bringing that to the stakeholder proceedings. But we have, a state interpretation of that law. We know what we have to do. We're planning towards that goal in a certain way. And that's started to create a little bit of friction because, once again, it's not, open to anybody's interpretation of how you would prefer us to be approaching climate targets. So, like, we have to do it in the way that's, set out in the law, that's interpreted by the lawyers at the state. And so we're doing that in this way. And so that type of engagement makes it a little bit difficult, especially in a time frame where so much is changing so quickly. We regularly get people asking in meetings like, Trump said this about, speeding up load interconnections. Have you put that in the model? And I was like, the model lockdown date was like 12 months ago, and the results were in like 5 months ago. No, it's not in the model. Well, what are you going to do about it? I was like, I'm not going to do anything about it. Like, we're going to get the results, and then we're going to see how would this change if something like this happens. There's a very dynamic environment. People live by the news and by their news feed, and long-term planning is not that type of a process, especially one of these long-term goals. So there's just that friction to manage.
I'll add one more. Schuyler, I like this one. Resources. So Schuyler focused on time. I'll focus on resources. I think everyone in our industry, in the electric industry, power industry, is signed up for more things than they can handle. So bringing in more resources is a very helpful thing in that. So, I mean, when Schuyler and I are trying to schedule meetings to collaborate, like we're talking about, there's a lot of times that he's pulled off on something that has nothing to do with something I'm, want to talk to him about, and the same on my side. We did, I think it was last year, the year before, we did hire 1 or 2 specific staff members just to focus on this. So recognizing that it is important, we need people to take the time to collaborate. If you don't already have the time to collaborate, recognize that you need it and staff up to allow for it. Makes things go way smoother. It's been very helpful.
2 barriers that we've run into are just misalignment. And once we are running into that, really the only way to deal with that is try to take it one by one. So just reach out, have conversations, and like, where are we kind of missing each other here, and try to find some connection, some linkage of must have to move the ball forward. The other one we've worried about is workshop fatigue. Asking our stakeholders to attend so many different workshops. We want to hear their perspectives, but they can't just keep coming to workshops. So we're still working through that. Some things that we've done are mailing out our materials. We started to record our workshops and are going to be posting them on our website to try to help with that, and then share with them where they can find those so that they could do it at their leisure. We always put contact information there as well for our stakeholder engagement specialist. And so if there are follow-up questions or requests for further details, they always have a point of contact to come to at the company.
Okay, so I got a different take again, but one of our barriers, I think, is engaging or keeping our regulators informed. I don't know if this is like an exception or if this is like,
They're from the Midwest.
Yeah, no, these two and these two got like a bromance
They're
going
New
on.
Yorkers. So like we
Uh,
talked about passive
we're n-
aggressive, but New Yorkers are like real in your face. So I think, yeah, you're different.
Yeah,
in
we are
Hawaii.
different. Okay, yeah. I mean, we have like an imaginary firewall with our regulators, but so I think one thing that did, so this is probably like a duh thing for you guys, right? But we started to include them in like our technical working group and stuff, which they weren't really a part of. You know, mostly because our regulators are mostly like you know, economist policy type. I mean, no offense, but yeah. So yeah, we started to include them, and then in that process, also educating them along the way. So
You
that
mean
kind of-
they're less engineers?
yeah,
Is that what
yeah,
you're saying?
yeah.
Okay.
Religion is the way of philosophy.
Yeah, I mean, like our regulators are not explaining prod sim to people. But yeah,
All right. That was a really good one. All right. I have so many questions, but I want to take one more and then I want to go to your questions. So start thinking about your questions and we'll take them from the center mic here, I think. So this is about planning and we should be thinking strategically and long term. So one of the questions that we came up with for this panel is, does that long-term strategic viewpoint help you in the near term with coalescing around potential solutions and actions? Who wants to start?
Yeah, I think this is a great question that looking ahead to a shared vision of an end state, then backcasting from that is often a way to get to where you know, to make progress on things. There can be a lot of controversy in around what the next step from where you are is. But if you can think about a future and then working back from that, that can allow negotiations and discussions. There's a lot less that's at stake in any one of those steps back from that future. And you can, I think you're able to come to agreement rather than dispute so I love this question.
Yeah, I'll actually give an example of that one. People tend to like way more than one data point. So if you're just saying it's an issue today, people are like, is it? So when we run long-term planning studies, we're looking for challenges in the system, needs on the system. There's an area in New York State that we've seen kind of certain technical challenges around starting 10, 20 years from now. When I go to my operators, a couple of weeks ago, I was like teaching an operations session and telling operators what we do in planning. They had a lot of questions on what we should be, or like comments on what we should be doing. But one of them was, hey, we see that all the time in real time now. Like that's something that is really, really helpful that you're finding it in the future as a growing need because we're starting to see it creep up. So now when we go to stakeholders and we need to say, hey, this is a growing concern, something that could really help the power system out, we have multiple data points in two very different departments that have different objectives at times. So it's, you know, that long-term approach gives you additional data in my mind to help solidify recommendations you might be making in the short term.
Totally agree with that point. You know, if you're stuck in the forest and you're walking through, it's great to zoom out and see the path and then go back down and keep taking another step, then zoom back out, see the path. The difficulty that I've seen in New York so far that has tended to play actually against the point that Mike brought up, which I totally agree with. That's ideally how it would work, is that the long-term plan in New York State is so tremendously difficult and tremendously stringent that it has caused a lot of friction in the stakeholder community, you know, with some of the technical people that are forced to kind of implement certain aspects of this. There's still some technical challenges with full implementation of that law. And so we've zoomed out, but now there's people saying, actually, we need to exit the forest at these 3 different places, you know, this place, no, this place, no, this place. And then when we go back to the path, people are pulling in different directions. And then so we need resolution there. Obviously, I think one of the things that we need is a lot more clarity on, you know, consensus building in that long-term future, you know, more understanding, more consensus building for that long-term vision. So we can actually have the benefit of the, you know, zooming back into the specific plan so we can take some steps and then do that, you know, zoom out, zoom in benefit. But we've had a lot of struggles with that in New York State so far. Ideally, you know, that long-term plan serves as that that shining light in the distance, the city on the hill, whatever you want to call it for people to keep in their mind as a target. But it's been difficult in this specific process in New York State.